welcome to Can My Law Firm Accept Bitcoins? Blockchain and the Practice of Law. I'm really honored to be up here with Amy Haar, who, to give you a little bit of background, is the newly minted president of Integra Canada, and found out she was giving this talk just on Thursday of this week. So I think we do definitely need to give her a round of applause for stepping up and filling this slot with me. Importantly, both Amy and I are active on Twitter, and so you can see Amy's Twitter handle right here, Amy Haar. And I am the lawyer in residence at Clio. So I'm a New York licensed attorney that's been living and working with Clio in Vancouver, Canada for the last 5 years. I provide a level of legal scholarship and educational outreach to the legal community, and my Twitter handle is @JoshuaLenon. And we've got a couple of key things we want to talk about today, our agenda. What is blockchain? And we're going to dial it back just a bit from Bitcoin to look at blockchain first, because you're going to need to understand a little bit of the technology behind blockchain before we move over to cryptocurrencies and teach you how to use them in your law firm. We're going to look at why blockchain matters to lawyers. Then we're going to jump directly into some practical guidance, including some tips and tricks from the courts themselves on how to handle cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. And then lastly, we'll close out with some additional resources for you. So my co-presenter, Amy, will take the first group section right now, which, what are blockchains?
Thank you very much, Josh, and thank you so much for the opportunity to present Cloud Clio. I followed Joshua for many years on Twitter before I had the chance to actually meet him and get to know him. And I highly recommend you following his Twitter account. He is an active tweeter and a well-respected tweeter. At every panel that I've seen Josh sit on, he's walked away as hands-down superstar of every conference that I've been at that I've had the privilege to see him. And now to share the stage with the likes of Josh is quite a privilege and an honor. So thank you again. I'm super happy to be here. I'm the president of Integra Ledger Canada. I came in from Toronto, and this is my very first time in New Orleans, and I'm super excited to see all that it has to offer and to share with you a bit about our topic today. What are blockchains? We're going to start with Bitcoin. This is the Bitcoin symbol. It is known as a digital asset that its inventor created to be used as a form of payment. I'm going to try and keep this session super simple, just so you can understand the concepts behind what's going on. But Bitcoin is a digital currency that you can use to make payments and engage in peer-to-peer transactions. Who here owns Bitcoin? There's a few of you. Have you transacted in Bitcoin?
I just told it.
Does anybody accept Bitcoin in their law firm? Wow.
Oh, one in the back. Two.
This is
excellent.
Fantastic. I'm so impressed. So, who is this faceless, nameless, well, he's not nameless, he does have a name, Satoshi Nakamoto. We don't know if Satoshi is a he, a she, an it, a they. But what Satoshi did was publish a white paper in 2008. This white paper really was the beginning of what we know today as Bitcoin. It was about peer-to-peer electronic transactions and interactions. The abstract distills a number of philosophical, I think the philosophical understanding is important to be informed about just as much as technical understanding. And here you can see it distilled just more toward very simplified peer-to-peer electronic transactions and interactions without financial institutions, using a cryptographic proof instead of central trust. So the key point to take away is what this paper established was the ability to put trust in a network instead of in a centralized institution. So what happened next? 2008, this paper comes out, and today we have Starbucks accepting Bitcoin, Microsoft accepting Bitcoin, QuickBooks accepting Bitcoin, and a host of other merchants accepting Bitcoin as payment for sales and sales of goods and services. Does anybody know what the unofficial mascot of Bitcoin is? if somebody actually knows, I have a special gift for you.
Oh.
Really.
Okay,
One of
quick,
the earliest
Google.
things you could buy using Bitcoin were socks. And not just any socks, but alpaca socks, socks made from alpaca wool. I was at a farm last weekend in Stirling, Ontario, which is where I'm from. There's a number of alpaca farms, and I went and bought a few pairs of socks just to engage in the process, except I did use my credit card and not Bitcoin. But they're it's super soft wool, but it really represents all that Bitcoin has to offer on a peer-to-peer perspective. So it enables, alpaca farmers in the middle of nowhere to sell their socks and get paid electronically without relying on a central institution. That is the core takeaway. And the Bitcoin price today is $3,841, so it's gone up since the first pair of alpaca socks were sold. The market cap today is $63 billion. There are 11 digital currencies over $1 billion, each with their own market cap of more than $1 billion. Hundreds of thousands of businesses accept Bitcoin as a currency, and there are over 30 industry consortia for blockchain. And in this room, we only have 2 lawyers that are accepting it as a form of payment. So you can see that there's lots going on. It's important. And what really is interesting is the technology underlying Bitcoin, which is the topic of our conversation today about blockchains. What are blockchains? Here's 2 diagrams. You can see on your left a typical diagram of a trusted intermediary. So you've got the cloud in the middle, and that would be a centralized database where data resides. But then you have blockchain, an image of a blockchain representation, which is peer-to-peer trust. So you can see and think of it, I think the best way of describing blockchain is distributed ledger system. Right, so you can see the peer-to-peer trust is distributed, and the example on your left is centralized. And what this distribution enables is multiple parties to hold a record of all the transactions that take place and to be agreed on mutually without the risk of being modified after the fact. So the technologies that it relies on are cryptographic public keys, hash functions, and Merkle trees. And that's getting a little bit into the technology, but really it's a simple way of saying that fancy math is used to ensure 2 things. 1, that the network keeps a secret, and 2, that it verifies that the transaction hasn't been tampered with. So that is a concise description of what blockchain is. It's really a whole lot more than that, but you can see here the contrast between a distributed network of nodes that each server can connect in multiple ways to the other, and you can see the trusted central party in the left-hand diagram.
We've got a question. Do you mind waiting for the mic? Sorry, there'll be one coming right to you. Otherwise, we won't be able to hear you. Thank you, Claudia. Oh, this gentleman right here.
Got lost. Sorry, I just wanted to ask, what do you mean by keep a secret? You said that.
It's very easy to encrypt data so that only individuals with authorized access can receive the key to decrypt a certain document. So in that sense, it's secret from anybody else but the person that is supposed to be seeing that information.
So most cryptocurrencies have a public and a private address. And to transfer a cryptocurrency, you have to be able to provide your private address. But the authentication of that private address is cryptographically hashed into the transfer. So the fact that there's both this public and private part of it is how it keeps at least that part of it secret. There are other ways to encode limited amounts of information in a blockchain transaction, and those could also be encrypted hashes. They may represent, say, a document source, for example, or a date timestamp, and those could also be kept secret through the encrypted hashing.
But not that the actual transaction
No,
occurred.
the fact that a transaction occurred is public, and that's one of the things we'll talk about a little bit later.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's lots of issues that arise because then that also changes whether you have a private blockchain, a public blockchain, or a consortium type of blockchain. So it gets complex really quickly, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. So industry has responded to blockchain. We have a number of consortia already formed. R3 representing Wall Street, financial institutions establishing R&D on financial transactions, interbank transfers, trillions of dollars of derivatives are transacted. Hyperledger, Ethereum, so we've got banking, we've got insurance, we've got law, we've got Wall Street, we've got medicine, all responding to blockchain and forming their own initiatives. But what about law? The Integra Ledger Blockchain Consortium has been formed as a global blockchain for law. And where are we today? The state of Delaware, August 1st, just enacted legislation permitting shareholders to be registered on blockchains, as well as new certificated securities. And as I understand, Josh will get into this a little bit later, but older uncertificated securities are able to be registered in the state of Delaware, which is where, as most of you know, most of the Fortune 500 companies are registered. So it's a really important initiative. Josh will get into the more specific details of what that represents later on. We also have trademark registration. You can go to Cognate, which is a website that permits you to enter first use of your trademark using the blockchain. So it's a time-stamped permanent record of trademark use. These are really great examples of what legal industry is doing. Also in bankruptcy, regulatory filings, litigation, contracts, smart contracts. We have a whole session on contracts and smart contracts.
Yeah, coming up tomorrow. Yes, so we'll focus on that aspect in tomorrow's session.
So, and of course, payments. And I'm going to pass it over to Josh, who's going to explain in detail more about the payment side so you can understand how to use Bitcoin in your law firm.
Thank you. So that was just a look at blockchain and how it differs from the normal transfer of information, which usually goes through a centralized authority. So when it comes to money, the information around it tends to go through a bank. When it comes to your own documents, you store them in the cloud, so it goes through a central data server. But what we're looking at is something that's decentralized. So how do you use a decentralized system in your law firm? And for most lawyers that are attending this conference, you're going to be looking at blockchain as an asset. That's how it's going to affect your law firm the most. So when we talk about assets, you're going to see a ton of articles like this one. This is from the Financial Times that talks about the fact that Bitcoin can be used to hide assets in divorces because people believe it offers a degree of anonymity. And we're going to get into that when we look at blockchain as evidence in just a little bit. But the first thing you should understand is that blockchain is a means of storing value, and handling that value is something that you will have to have as part of your law firm in the future. So everybody's familiar with Bitcoin. It is the most widely used, highest valued, most familiar form of blockchain as an asset. And all it really does is it allows for the creation of a currency from nothing, which is pretty much how most other currencies are created. The federal government says we need more dollars. They appear from the magic money tree that apparently they keep in Britain, and there's more dollars in the system. But there's no central authority when it comes to a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. So how do you get more Bitcoins? What's done is a system called mining. And it's basically a way of encouraging people to continue to process a blockchain ledger. So every time a Bitcoin passes hands, some computer somewhere on that distributed network needs to store a record of the transaction. And in fact, multiple computers do. And the way that they're encouraged to run this software in the background of storing transactions, of creating a chain record that goes from transaction to transaction, is they also run a mining program. And that's based on a specific algorithm, and every now and then that algorithm, depending on time, number of people working on it, depending on the complexity of how many Bitcoins exist, will actually spit out a new Bitcoin. And somebody has minted their own money, mined it out of the ether, and that's how we get more Bitcoins. And it creates a whole host of opportunities for people to continue to run a blockchain system. But what's interesting is, if I can create a Bitcoin out of nothing, I can create any cryptocurrency out of nothing. And that's what we've seen. And so when I say Bitcoin, don't think a single cryptocurrency, but think the first of over 900 cryptocurrencies that are currently being created, mined, and traded right now. You can see some of the logos from some of the more popular ones out there. The ones you should probably keep on your radar are Ethereum, the newly forked form of Bitcoin called Bitcoin Cash, Ripple, and Litecoin. But again, there are almost 1,000 of these. There are probably 1,000 of these right now. And they often are called cryptocurrencies or tokens. And all of them are a way of storing value. So how do you store the value of a cryptocurrency? You need something called a wallet. So just like we're all carrying wallets where we store our cash right now, there are digital wallets where you can store a cryptocurrency. And there are two forms that are mostly used. There are software wallets where they actually take the information off the internet and store it within a local device. It could be a mobile app, it could be a desktop computer, it could be actually a USB key. Or there are web wallets. These are more like cloud-based wallets for storing your Bitcoins. If you're going to be using Bitcoins in your law firm, you're going to need one of these at some point. So just by taking a look at blockchain.org, they actually give you a variety of different wallets that are available. These are some examples you'll be able to download in the slides. So here's desktop, some mobile ones, web-based ones. I want you to note Coinbase in the far right, or far left for you guys. That's actually a very popular one, and we're going to highlight that a couple different times within this presentation. And one of my favorite attorneys that's using Bitcoin right now, so Addison Cameron Huff out of Toronto, actually recommends Jax as a Bitcoin wallet. And that's jax.io for those of you who are looking to try it. It has several features that we'll highlight as we continue this presentation. But it's not just enough to have a Bitcoin or other cryptocurrency. You need a place to store it, and you need a place to exchange it. So once you have the basics, I have a cryptocurrency, I have a wallet, then I need to start doing transactions about it. But what's very interesting is, while you can buy alpaca socks, while you can pay for a lawyer to come and represent you, courts have been treating cryptocurrencies as, quote, not money, unquote. And this is a very important distinction when it comes to using cryptocurrencies within your law firm, because you're going to see that when we deal with divorces that have cryptocurrencies as part of their assets, or estates where you have 4 Bitcoins and 5 heirs, or a bankruptcy filing, the rules that you will be operating under are not rules that apply to cold hard cash, but things that apply to property. And let's take a look at some examples of where courts and regulators have done that. So one of the earliest ones that really set this standard was a bankruptcy case called Morsi versus Fast Techs. And it was actually a company that built those mining computers that I was talking about. And they got paid in Bitcoins. And they also paid other people in Bitcoins. And when they filed a bankruptcy, actually they were forced to file an involuntary bankruptcy claim, there was a motion on how to handle the Bitcoins within it. Some people wanted to treat it as cash, you just pay it out right away. Others wanted to treat it as property, so that way we can adjust the value of it by the trustee. And what the ruling was is that Bitcoins, at least in this instance, are not US dollars. And it was the first real ruling that talked about the fact that Bitcoins, while they may have aspects of value, are not currency as we treat currency in law. The IRS has come out with their own ruling on this. They've said that Bitcoins are property for tax purposes and should be treated as such. And that means if you're doing any wealth management for your clients, you're going to have declarations around whether or not they're gaining income from holding on to this property. And what's really interesting is, so far as we know, just about 3 people have filed IRS claims on value from Bitcoins, even though we know that there are approximately 3 million people in the United States that potentially possess Bitcoins and are at least arriving market gains on them right now in the high valuations we're seeing for Bitcoins. The Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which is part of the FBI, has stated that virtual currencies do not have all the attributes of a real currency. So because they don't have a central agency backing them up, like the US Fed, or the Bank of Canada in Canada, or the Bundesbank in Germany for the European Union, means that they aren't really money. So just because you're storing value in them doesn't make them cash. You can store value in anything. You can store value in a fine painting. You can store value in a case of wine that you're aging. You can store value in a stock certificate from Google. And so when it comes to cryptocurrencies and you helping your clients with them, don't think of them as cash. Think of them as not money. And the last little one that I want to highlight is the Security and Exchange Commissions, which set a really weird standard when they said that Bitcoin is a form of money. And what they really meant is it doesn't have all the attributes of money, just like the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network is saying. And so as such, there are certain security investments out there that fall under exempt categories if they handle Bitcoins. Now, we're seeing the SEC do a lot of work on this right now, along with the CFTC. And so a lot of the exemptions that they're allowing are changing on a very frequent basis right now, and we're kind of all learning together what applies. But if you're going to be handling Bitcoins in your law firm, they are not cash, and that will drastically impact how you handle them. Mon, are you raising your hand? Okay. So how do I know this is going to drastically impact how you handle them? Because of the fact that just last week, the Nebraska State Bar actually came out with a ruling on whether or not it's okay for lawyers to accept Bitcoins. And because they are not money, there are some very interesting things that they're requiring you to do to be able to ethically handle a cryptocurrency like a Bitcoin. So in their opinion, so 1703 just came out on the 15th, they asked and answered 3 questions. May an attorney receive digital currencies like Bitcoin as payment for legal services? May an attorney be paid in cryptocurrencies by a third party for legal services performed for another? And may an attorney hold cryptocurrencies in trust or escrow for clients? And with each of these, they came up with a slightly different answer. And I'd like to walk through each of these and give you some tips and tricks on how to approach them all. So the first one, accepting Bitcoins as payments. They basically said yes. Lawyers can get paid in anything. Lawyers can get paid in cash. Lawyers can get paid in chickens. Lawyers can get paid in not money. But handling not money still doesn't remove the obligation of avoiding unreasonable fees. And when it comes to something that has the ability to shift in value, like a cryptocurrency does, that actually puts some extra steps in how you handle it when accepting it as a fee. So think about it. If you had accepted Google stock a decade ago as payment for a divorce, a will, a parking ticket, right? And held on to that Google stock, that is one sweet deal for getting paid for helping with something as simple as a parking ticket. And a cryptocurrency, because it can grow quite quickly, is having that exact same problem. It might be $200 one month in value. It might be $500 in value the next month. And if you're charging your client a hypothetical 1 Bitcoin a month for the exact same service every month, your fee structure is changing rapidly. And so under most states' ethics rules, you can't accept an unreasonable fee. There are lots of different ways of measuring that. But in Nebraska, this is what they recommend you do if a client wants to pay you in Bitcoin. First of all, notify the client that you will not be holding it as a Bitcoin. You are going to immediately convert it to US dollars. Now, they say US dollars because it's Nebraska, but if you're an international person, you may convert it, obviously, to a different currency. They expect you to convert it at a market rate. I'm going to teach you how to find out what that is in just a second. And use a payment processor that actually supports a know your customer regime, and then credit the client's account accordingly at the time of payment. So you can't hold on to a Bitcoin and hope it increases or decreases in value, and quite frankly, it's a bit risky to go either way. You have to convert it right away at the market value. You can't assign a higher value to it, and then, and only then, can you pay yourself. So how do you go about doing this? Well, first of all, you have to get that wallet that we talked about before, and then you have to evaluate it. And I think the best way for you to find the market value of a cryptocurrency is to look at what's called an exchange. So the exchange that I recommend for Bitcoin is the New York Stock Exchange. They have their own Bitcoin index. You can access it for free on their website. You can actually just type in the value of what is a Bitcoin in Google, and it'll pop up from this source right there. And as you can see, it not only tracks the Bitcoin's current value, but it actually tracks the Bitcoin's value in time. And this is especially important if you're handling Bitcoin as evidence in, say, a divorce, a bankruptcy, a will. So if you need to establish what was it at the time they bought it versus what is it at the time now, you can use this exact source to go back in time and track the change in value over time. Just like you could looking up a car in the Blue Book to see what was the purchase price versus what's the sale price now. You can do the exact same thing with Bitcoin using a tool like this. And that not only helps you establish the objective market rate now, but the objective market rate back then. So this is a great tool to use for something like this. Then you need to convert it. So remember I mentioned Coinbase before. They're a wallet program, but they're also actually a payment processor. They're a place where you can convert real cash into crypto cash. And one of the reasons why I'm recommending Coinbase is they actually have taken a very large step in making sure that they are in compliance, not just with federal regulations, like some of the ones that we highlighted before, but also state regulations when it comes to transferring money. So a lot of the cases that we're seeing in terms of litigation when it comes to Bitcoins and other cryptocurrencies is people are sending cash back and forth, right? Or value back and forth, and they're not necessarily regulating the transfer. So Coinbase actually does make sure that if you are taking a cryptocurrency and converting it into cold hard cash, that you're doing it with all the disclaimers and all the filings that need to be done. So this one has been specifically recommended in this ethics opinion by the state of Nebraska, and as you can see by this just quick screen grab from their website, that they actually work with most of the US states right now. So before you do use them, obviously, you should go and check and make sure that they comply with your state's regulations. But this is one of the few places where I think lawyers can go and turn a Bitcoin into actual cash. Once you convert it into actual cash, then you can deposit it in your trust account. But if you're going to be accepting cryptocurrencies from a third party, the ethics opinion said there's an extra step. And that extra step was labeled KYC, and it's an acronym from the financial industry for Know Your Customer. So right now we know that there are lots of different ways to transfer value around the world. There are cryptocurrencies. There are also things like gems. And different industries have been forced to come up with new regulations for making sure that we're passing value around the world in a way that isn't necessarily harmful to people or encouraging, quite frankly, dangerous acts. And so pretty much every industry out there other than the legal profession has been forced to implement what's called these KYC regulations. And the reason lawyers haven't had to do this is because we actually try to protect the anonymity of our own clients. And so the sources of cash, the use for cash, are things that are often in question as a part of our work. And our ability to represent those people and making in their activities, hopefully the right activities, is in jeopardy from something like this. So the American Bar Association in 2014 put out this lawyer's guide to detecting and preventing money laundering, and that's basically a know your customer activity. So if a third party wants to help your client with their legal fees and asks to pay you in Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency, I highly recommend you download this white paper. It's free, and it'll walk you through not only the background of Know Your Customer, but a lot of different steps for them. And I'm going to just highlight one quick exercise that they say, because anti-money laundering regulations are now mostly based on a risk analysis. So you won't necessarily have to do this with every client, but this is kind of the basic framework you'll go through if you think there is a risk from accepting Bitcoins. So the first is identify the client and their beneficial owner. What we're seeing in a lot of real estate transactions right now are people hiding behind corporations. So the corporation buys the property, they don't pay tax, they charge like $1 rent to Donald Trump, and he lives in his apartment rent-free for the rest of his life, right? That's a beneficial owner. And we're seeing a lot of that when it comes to transfer of cryptocurrencies as well. You don't necessarily know who's getting the benefit of it. So take the time to research them, understand their business opportunity, their relationship to your client, why are they stepping in? Now, if it's a simple relationship like brother and sister, parent and child, those are simple. But once you hit into the business, you may need to dig a little bit deeper. You need to understand that business relationship and conduct due diligence on this. And one of the things that they talk about is it's not just due diligence the first time you do some research into that, but if they keep kind of changing things up. Say they go to a different cryptocurrency. They move from Bitcoin to Zcash, which is one that is attempting to be more private than other cryptocurrencies out there. Ask yourself why they're doing that. Are they trying to avoid something? Do I need to dig further? And if you cannot conduct satisfactory due diligence, the advisement by the ABA is to walk away. Now, obviously, you have to comply with the rules for disengaging from a client, but don't put yourself in a situation where you might be engaging in money laundering on behalf of somebody. So this is a simple know your customer exercise. I highly recommend you read the paper if you're going to be accepting Bitcoins from a third party and walk through the risk framework. But this is one way to make sure that you're doing the right thing when handling Bitcoins as a lawyer for payment. The last thing that the ethics opinion talked about was Bitcoins and trust. And this is, I think, another frequent exercise that's going to happen to lawyers. There are going to be Bitcoins in dispute. They're not going to come to you as payment, but you're going to be asked to hold on to them in some fashion. And one of the interesting things is these aren't money, right? So they can't go in your trust account. There's just no place to put them. This is why I think you need to have a wallet if you're going to be handling cryptocurrencies, and pick one that handles multiple types of cryptocurrencies, like we saw with Jax.io. So you need to tell the client that you will not be converting this cryptocurrency into cold hard cash. You're not going to money launder for them. You need to inform the client that just because they're storing a Bitcoin with you doesn't mean they're going to get today's value of that Bitcoin back. It could go up, it could go down. That's not your problem. You're just holding on to the coin itself. And you need to take reasonable security. Now, in this case, reasonable security has been recommended in the ethics opinion to include possibly these three things. The first is what's called cold storage. So that's when you take a Bitcoin off the internet. And that's one way of doing it is to use the software that we highlighted before, desktop applications, hardware applications, they'll help you with that. Another thing you can do is encryption of your private keys. So if you're writing this down, which you should, they're actually really hard to remember, you're going to encrypt the file where you store that and make it really tough for somebody to crack that. The other thing that you can do is what's called a multi-signature account. So as we talked about before with the question of privacy and anonymity with Bitcoins, is you basically sign every transaction, right? Multi-signature accounts allow for up to 15 different signatures that have to be collected before the transfer of the Bitcoin is allowed to go forward. So one way to do this in a way that protects both you and your client is to pick a wallet program that allows multi-signature accounts and you both sign the Bitcoin, right? So you can't walk away with the Bitcoin, they can't walk away with the Bitcoin, but if you both agree, then the Bitcoin can be transferred. That's a multi-signature account, and that's one way that you can protect yourself. And again, the tool I highlighted, Jax.io, supports that. And it's one of the reasons why Addison Cameron Huff recommends it. Only if you take these steps can you hold Bitcoin on behalf of your lawyers. And to be fair, it's not really that much different than holding on to a stock certificate, holding on to a napkin that was doodled on by Picasso, holding on to an important, say, lost novel from J.D. Salinger. You're going to take reasonable precautions, and you're going to lock these down. And if it turns out it actually is a lost novel by J.D. Salinger, oh my God, everybody's rich. And if it's not, well, you can recycle it later. But all of these steps have to be taken into account before you can do that. And if you do that, then congratulations. You can now accept Bitcoin as payment. You can now accept Bitcoin from third parties. You can now store Bitcoins on behalf of your clients. Bitcoins are no problem for your law firm because they're just not cash. But that's not the only way that Bitcoins will be affecting your law firm. The other aspect is going to be blockchain as evidence. Oh, before we go on, let's take this question. Claudia, do you mind if we grab the mic? Sorry.
Maybe you could just repeat the question. It's real short.
Sure.
Can Bitcoin be destroyed? Can Bitcoin be lost?
Bitcoin can be lost, and that basically destroys it. So if Bitcoin enters a cold storage, where there's no means of it actually transferring itself, because it's on, say, a USB key that gets flushed down the toilet, it is, for all intents and purposes, destroyed. It's technically, if somebody could find the address and bring it back, it could happen, but it's very, very difficult to do. Question right here.
Along similar efforts, if something happens to the encryption, is the Bitcoin destroyed?
Again, for all intents and purposes, yes. Right? If you lose the password to decrypt it, you have lost the value there. So just like if you lost the combination to the safe with that Google stock certificate, you can't turn in that stock certificate for value. It's the exact same kind of occurrence. So it could just as well not exist. No. Any other questions on Bitcoin as an asset before we jump into this last section?
To your right.
Oh, we got a whole bunch, yeah. All right.
Has there been any case where the asset itself has been declared illegal and order destroyed?
It's been seized, and we'll talk about that as part of evidence in just a bit, so I don't want to jump too far ahead. But what we've seen with the US government when they seize Bitcoins is they tend to auction them off later. No. Yes, sir.
As a divorce lawyer, this is a very disturbing topic. You know, one of the things I was thinking of, though, when you talked about cold storage, you know, for years we stored our files and things in different media, and
Yes.
then I started hearing of this thing called bit rot, you know, with bit rot with
Okay.
DVDs and things like that. I mean, aren't you taking a risk then if you store this valuable item in some sort of medium that isn't going to last or could become corrupted?
So I think that's slightly different than being a blockchain issue. So any medium is potentially risky for storing information, right? Wax cylinders, vinyl records, tape cassettes. These all store information out there and are potentially subject to loss. So I don't think you should focus on that, because specifically, blockchain, if it has a widely distributed network, actually is less likely to be disrupted from any one individual computer going down than a single storage location. So cold storage, risky, but no more so than any other like technology or filing cabinet you put information into. Now, just don't flush your USB keys. No.
Got a question over
And over here.
Yeah, so excuse my ignorance real quick.
Oh no, this is beginner level. Yeah.
If I'm going to store a Bitcoin in cold storage, is it just like any other file, or what kind of medium does it take?
It'll
like a
mostly
USB
be a
example?
file. It'll be your private key and a hash or an address associated with that value of Bitcoin itself, and nobody else will be able to kind of claim that value. So one of the things that I've heard Bitcoins described as, when you transfer it, you're not actually transferring the coin itself, you're transferring the lock on the coin, right? So it's just a piece of value, so a storage locker, right? And so if you want to like buy the storage locker, I'll just give you the keys to the lock, and then you go on with it. So when you're storing it, yeah, it's just like any other file for the most part. They don't actually take up that much memory. I've seen them be like a couple of kilobytes, and they're very small. So as we get into blockchain as evidence, you're going to see a little bit of some of this. So I'm trying not to dive too deep. Everybody ready to go forward? Last question.
If you store it in cold storage, is it alienable? Can I hand you my thumb drive and give you my Bitcoin?
Potentially, yes. So is it encrypted? Does it require a multi-signature? Do I even know what you've given me? Yeah, all of those things will come into play. But yeah, you can physically hand somebody a Bitcoin. Or at least the ability to claim a Bitcoin. Let's think of it that way. All right, let's jump into blockchain as evidence, and that'll answer some of these questions. You'll see how this works. So interestingly, because a blockchain is a distributed network, able to store information across a whole bunch of really disinterested parties, right? It's a miner out there. They don't care. What we're seeing is that certain services are starting to rely on blockchain in a variety of different ways in the legal space. So Amy already talked about Delaware has instituted a new means of issuing and tracking uncertified shares in corporations using the blockchain. So if you are helping your customers start their own businesses and you're considering Delaware for public traded businesses or even privately traded businesses, this might be a good location to look at. But I think we can go simpler than that. What we've seen in Vermont and Arizona is a really low-key shift to where blockchain can be used to authenticate documents. Is this the actual document? Yes. It is basically a notarization service. And these both have happened relatively recently. So Arizona was in February of 2017, and Vermont was in June of 2016, and they have both basically altered the rules of evidence within their jurisdiction to allow for blockchain certification. Now, you'll have to read in each individual state the best way to go about that, but I wanted to highlight one app that has sprung up since then to try and take advantage of that, and that's Block Notary. So it is an app that allows you to take a picture of a document, and it does two things. It stores a copy of that picture. I believe it does on AWS, so it's not private. And then it stores a hash of that document. It kind of compresses it down and stores that hash into Ethereum's blockchain. Now, this is important. When we talk about the fact that there are 900 different cryptocurrencies out there are different blockchains out there. And Amy mentioned, for example, that some are private, and you don't necessarily get access to them. Or some are public, but it's distributed everywhere. You need, as a lawyer looking at blockchain as evidence, to ask, what blockchain is this on? Is it private? Do I have to get a court order for you to give me access to this information? Those are all things that you're going to have to consider if you're looking at blockchain as evidence. Now, this is Ethereum. The transaction itself is public. The document is not. If it ever comes into question, you can actually pull up the entry in the Block Notary app. It will show you the picture of the document, show you the hash associated with that document, show you the timestamp on when it was created. It's one way to verify that a document exists. And so blockchain as evidence is going to be seen more and more in terms of legitimized transactions. These will mostly be related to smart contracts. I highly recommend you go to the smart contract section tomorrow on that, and we'll give you some information on that. But this is one just simple way with an iPhone, you can quickly and easily use a blockchain. Now, just because it's on the blockchain doesn't mean it's necessarily legal. There are a whole variety of apps that are starting to do this right now. And they keep giving out really bad legal advice. Like, just take a picture of your will and it's notarized. No. Know the rules for your own jurisdiction. If it's got to be signed by hand, if it needs multiple witnesses, this is not the right tool for you. But if you just need proof that a document exists, if you need proof that you have created a particular type of IP, like a trademark or a copyright, tools like this exist. They're being used. They're rapidly being spun up. You should definitely research them. Most people, however, will think of blockchain and bitcoins as evidence when it comes to criminal trials. Dun, dun, dun. So bitcoins were assumed to be anonymous. I don't know why. And a lot of people use them to buy drugs, lots of drugs, on this place called the Silk Road. So this Forbes writer back in 2013 was wondering, really, how anonymous is it? So they spent 0.3 bitcoins. So just like a dollar can be broken down into quarters, dimes, and pennies, bitcoins can be broken down almost infinitely into percentages. So she spent 0.3 bitcoins on buying marijuana on a couple of different sites. I don't know why she published that either. But then asked a Bitcoin expert to see if they could track the transactions. And it took the Bitcoin expert pretty much a half hour. Now, what they did was they had been tracking Bitcoin transactions for a while, and Bitcoin transactions themselves are public. And so once you start identifying where transactions go, for example, a very popular site like Silk Road, and maybe you as the researcher purchase a little something yourself, you can then start seeing which other transactions point towards that address. And once you get enough of those, then you have an idea of who's transacting with whom. And the FBI is tracking pretty much all of these right now. So they have the biggest idea of where these transactions are occurring. Now, I want you to notice something. So just like Bitcoins can be broken down into almost infinite decimal points, they can also be recombined into greater and greater values, and that's called mixing. And so once you hit a certain point where they mix, like that big circle there, once they go out in the blue area, you kind of lose track. So just like cold hard cash, Bitcoins are fungible. And that means that we can only really track transactions up to a certain point. And once they conglomerate, then it's a whole new ball of yarn. And so Bitcoin as evidence, especially in a criminal trial, you should be asking, what addresses are they tracking? What transactions do they have? What hashes are linked to those? So that you can review whether or not they're actually tracking the transaction that's important to you, or maybe something that happened after a mixed transaction that doesn't apply to you. And how do you do that? You use a tool called blockchain.info, blockchain.info. It's very technical. If you've got somebody whose freedom relies on it, pull in an expert, okay? But what it allows you to do is to type in any address for a transaction, and it will pull up information telling you when did it happen, what was the value, where did it pass on to. So for example, we can see on the far left the output, and then on the right with the green arrow, where did it end up? So we took this 2.9 Bitcoins, we divided them up. 0.39 went to this one address. 2.5 went to the second address by the green arrow. And I can tell you how many times it was authenticated within this particular blockchain. That's pretty much it. That's all we know from this transaction. We don't know who did it. We don't know who was the recipient. But we know this transaction happened. And it tends to be tracked in kind of tree transactions like this. So for every transaction, we kind of know the starting point, the end point, and if they get mixed at that end point, then we lose track. So if you are dealing with Bitcoins as criminal evidence, this is what you want to take a look at. How far does the tree go before it's interrupted, either by a mix or by something being taken offline to cold storage? And if it's only this little tiny transaction, that doesn't really tell you or a jury a lot. And that's something you need to point out. And that's why most criminal investigations don't focus on the Bitcoins themselves, but on the transfer of fiat currencies into Bitcoins. So this is my new favorite case name, the United States versus 50.44 Bitcoins. It's an asset forfeiture case that came out of the Silk Road criminal seizures. So there was a Silk Road user, Jumbo Monkey Biscuit, that's what their name was, who was transacting in Bitcoins and had been advertising in another location that they could actually turn cold hard cash into Bitcoins for you. Now, remember I mentioned that service Coinbase that had taken the time to file as a money transfer service in the states where that's required and make the necessary declarations in the states where that's required? Guess what Jumbo Monkey Biscuit had not done? They had not filed those declarations. So in the state of Maryland, when they were receiving bricks of $10,000 to an unmarked post office box and mailing people Bitcoins back, turns out that was illegal, and the FBI came down on them hard by knocking on their door, showing a search warrant, and then helpfully the person there just gave them the computer with the Bitcoin addresses on it. Now, could the FBI prove that the Bitcoins belonged to these people just because of the fact that they were Bitcoins? No. So that's why we have this asset forfeiture case. I'm going to seize those Bitcoins. I'm assuming they're part of a crime, and then I'm going to let a judge go through the evidence of the seizure, unmask Jumbo Monkey Biscuit, take a look at the fact that the FBI had a brick of $10,000 and a person who had a really poorly designed website saying they would turn $10,000 into a blockchain transaction, and these are the Bitcoins they had in their possession. Yeah, I think we can kind of tie this all together. So Bitcoin as evidence isn't necessarily anything that's proof of a crime, but it will be seized, it will be held, and it could be used as part of prosecution of a crime. And you, if you are a defense lawyer, probably shouldn't focus on the Bitcoin. You should focus on that brick of $10,000 bill or $10,001 bills that's sitting at a post office box, because that you can show possession of, and so can the FBI. So when looking at Bitcoin as evidence, it's great for authenticating other types of information like documents, timestamps, information itself. It's not great at authenticating necessarily criminal financial transactions. And that's the takeaway that you should take from the United States versus 50.44 Bitcoins. So that's pretty much it for using Bitcoins in your law firm. You now can accept them as cash. Well, not as cash, but accept them and turn them into cash. You know how to hold them on behalf of a client. You know that you can't just take them from strangers, just like you shouldn't take candy from a stranger. And you know now that it's going to be part of evidentiary concerns in a variety of different types of cases. Where else can you learn more about this? Well, Amy was very helpful in putting up some additional resources for you, and we're also very lucky to have Haman Shadab, who's sitting in the back there, who will be giving a very great lecture on smart contracts and contract digitalization tomorrow at 2:05 p.m. Haman Shadab is a professor of law at New York University. He is one of the world's foremost experts on smart contracts. He's also the founder of Clause, which is a smart contract startup. So we're very lucky to have him here. So if you're looking for blockchain as a business tool, highly recommend you go to that. If you're looking to learn more about the tools that we mentioned today, here they are. Jax.io as a wallet, blockchain.info for establishing the existence of a Bitcoin address, New York Stock Exchange for establishing value, and Coinbase.com for turning all of that back into real money. And Amy, with her collaboration with Osgood Professional Development, which is one of the premier law schools in Canada, has put up this YouTube talk. What will they find in this talk, Amy?
Well, they'll find just a really quick teaser about a simple explanation from Peter Todd, who's a core Bitcoin developer, Marco Santori, who's working out of New York on smart contract work, and a number of others, Ann Butler from the Bank of Canada, about blockchain, smart contracts, and the law, and the different applications of what needs to happen for each of those topics.
And lastly, two little bits of reading. So blockchain, a background from DLA Piper, taking a look at some of the legal aspects of blockchain. And then modernizing client trust accounts using Bitcoin. This is actually an interesting thought experiment and something that I do think we're going to see. I think we're going to see bar associations, regulatory agencies taking a look at trust accounting, realizing that it's a little too loose right now. And they're going to start taking a look at blockchain as a means of storing evidence of trust account transactions. And when they do that, I'm going to build it into Clio. So thank you, everybody. I'm Joshua Lenon. I want to thank my colleague, Amy Tahar. That's been it.